Before we proceed, I ask our religious leaders to offer prayers.
As we continue, Lord, we ask that everything will move on smoothly.
It is time to find the truth and justice, to heal the nation, and to move forward as one people.
This is not a trial. This is an investigation into the mass atrocities that occurred in this country between 1994 and 2017.
We will start our proceedings for the day. Lead counsel, Mr. Fall, are you ready?
Ms. Horeja Balagay would lead this witness. Thank you.
I, Mamat Cham.
I, Mamat O.A. Cham.
Swear that I'll speak the truth,
The whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
Nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Thank you.
May I just draw your attention to the interpretation and transcription system?
My given names are Abubakar Suleiman Jeng.
My name is Ibrahima Ismaila Chongan.
My name is Sheriff M.L. Gomez.
Ibrahima Baba Kambi.
Modu Lamin Ba.
My name is Babukar Mali Jeng.
Do you know why the army was created?
I think it was as an, after the 81 rebellion here in the country, and then the coming into play of the Senegalese, the Confederation, and I think these were some of the requirements that we are thought were necessary to have a professional army, and I think it was after this that the army, this was some of the reasons why the army was created.
When the Gambia National Army was set up in July '94, I think first the government resorted to the British government to dispatch a British Army training team, which was good at the time because they recruited soldiers, inducted them to the army, and supervised the training. Of course, they were also assisted by some officers who were moved from the then gendarmerie, which was earlier established, and then some NCOs as well. But basically, the doctrine and the supervision of the recruit training was done by the British. So essentially, what it meant was that the Gambia had no capacity, skill capacity, to run a modern army.
The Confederation broke up in 1989 and the Senegalese left, and this is the first time the gendarmerie is commanded by Gambian officers, by Pres Diagne, and I became like a de facto the deputy, although my official function was battalion commander. Modjai went to create the Presidential Guard, and he commanded the Presidential Guard. And then we had Captain Sirif Mbai, who was the quartermaster. So at that time, we only had 3 captains, and Major was the commander of the gendarmerie.
You have mentioned 2 important problems that afflicted the armed forces. One was the lack of morale, or because of the problems of the change from gendarmerie to police. And the other was a lack of a well-defined military policy or military doctrine. Were there any other problems that affected the armed forces at the time?
I know there was corruption. I know in the outer world, in the outer country, in the government. And so this corruption tendency reflected very much upon the army as well. There was nepotism, there was cronyism, there was pick and choose. I cited my own case where I was denied commission for 5 years, even though I was qualified. I realized people were commissioned without even passing through the essential prerequisite training course of CSB, that is the Commission Selection Board, and they got commissioned, notwithstanding. There were also instances of commander taking soldiers to his own farm to work. And libertarian philosophy would call this slavery in that sense, where somebody is forced to work without pay. That would be slavery, and that's exactly what happened in the 1990s, 80s and the 90s, when the commander's farm was open to soldiers to go there. Once I refused to go. In fact, I never went. I refused to go, and I nearly got dismissed. Soldiers complained a lot. They had no choice but to take turns going to the commander's farm. The engineering corps of the army, who were responsible for building houses and other things, were also taken to the commander's house to build houses for the commander. So these were very demoralizing. We're not supposed to work for individuals. We're supposed to work for the government.
There were even times when you will see the collar of the shirt being torn because of the amount of washing that shirt has gone through. Trousers pale. Which doesn't portray a professional police force.
There were a series of demonstrations by soldiers from missions at Liberia, complaining of their dues that they're supposed not to be paid, and they are not paid. So that led to a series of demonstrations, like first contingency Liberia, the second contingency too, and the third contingency. All these soldiers went on a mission, and they came back, and they demonstrated, and they all demonstrated in the same issue, that is their dues.
Was the accommodation adequate?
It was not accommodated. It was very poor. It was, as I said, dormitory. It's an open space where you have beds, double beds, where you can have almost 30 to 40 soldiers in a particular room.
The army went to the point where it looked like it belonged to an individual family or an individual clan or an individual entity or a business entity. And there was no avenue whatsoever to do anything. You could complain. You couldn't even complain out loud. You couldn't do that. It's a disciplined organization. So we saw these things happen. People passing through the back way, getting what they want, lobbying and so on. And an army is supposed to be a disciplined entity.
The manner and the way in which elements coming from the tactical support group were received into the police. I think perhaps it's a question of perception that the TSG elements were perhaps coming to overshadow them, because the reality at the time also was that the tactical support group had at the time a better organizational structure. Personnel were even also more qualified than what you had in the old guard of the police.
We already have the Gambia Police Force, which was a very established force where my dad was. And we had to, the Gendarmerie came to complement the efforts of the police, especially in the rural areas. And also we were an armed police, in the detection and prevention of crime, and also gathering intelligence for the government.
The perception was that the police institution was seen as an institution for school dropouts and people who cannot do better.
Food wasn't good. We described the food as water chew.
As what?
Water chew. Water chew. Chew in our language means chew, sauce. So water chew is how we used to describe it. And even the cook, chief cook would call it water chew. Kubuganga leka kubuganga bai.
At this stage, what was the strength of the TSG or the police in general in terms of arms?
We were not armed enough to fight any insurgency.
Do you recall what was the security situation in the country as of July 1994?
As of July 1994, the general security of the country was calm, but within the services, there are men. Because we witnessed, let's call it, 2 demonstrations from the army personnel for their pay from Liberia and so on.
The claim was that they were promised that they would be paid upon their return a bonus, which I was not aware of, but then they discussed among themselves, and then not all of them, a group of them, decided to do a mutiny, but this was a mutiny without violence. They decided that they were not going to report for their normal duties, and then gathered around the commander's office.
What happened when they gathered around the commander's office?
When they gathered, I think the commander consulted with some of the officers, and then we decided to take them to one of the training rooms, and I think he also invited the then Gendarmerie commander, who was a Major Pasala Jain, and then there was also the British training team. There was a lieutenant colonel, I forgot the name, and one sergeant major, I think, if I can remember, it was Selos. We spoke to them and then told them that that was against the military order, and that if they had any grievances, they should channel it politely, and then it will be adjudicated and dealt with according to the army rules then existing.
That somebody came to me and said, you were sitting here. I said, what happened? He said, well, I heard soldiers in mutiny, there's a mutiny going on, and Captain Kambi is seen in the Pajero leading them. I said, well, this is Captain Kambi sitting here, so it's not me, you know that. And I was not well at the same time. I was working on crutches. So this was how bad the accusations were at that time. I heard about the mutiny, yes. I didn't go there. I didn't even know that they went to Makati Square or they went to State House or so. But I know they were my people who said they did not receive their balance of payment from Liberia.
One morning, soldiers from Liberia convoyed to the QRF room, expecting to meet the then army commander who used to be in Ndaunjai. Unfortunately, they could not meet Ndaunjai. The only person they could meet was Samejo Selos. Then
could you say again the next person?
Samejo Selos.
Who was Samejo Selos?
He was the British training team in the Gambia then.
Go ahead.
As they were in the QRF, waiting for the arrival of the army commander, later on, I understand that they knew that the army commander is not coming to see them. They started murmuring until Selos started to threaten them. He fired a gun, which resulted to a chaos. They have to grab him down, took the weapon from him, and then they start going out. Anybody they can catch, they get your weapon from you. They start shooting in the air. Then from there, they jump over the fence, took a bus. They all convoyed in that bus. They went straight to Banjul.
Do you know what happened in Banjul?
In Banjul, later the day, they came back with, how do you call it? If my memory will serve me correct, with the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Defense then. When they came back...
Do you know who that person was at the time?
No, I don't know. I don't know.
Kindly proceed, please.
All right, when they came back to the camp, they were paid their dues, then some, according to them, ringleaders who are strong-headed were discharged from the army.
During that time, ECHA was, what they were paying us was like $3 a day. That's $90 in a month for that peacekeeping operation. So, I mean, food was, it was just terrible. $90, and if you don't pay all that to the soldier, what do you expect from a soldier who was facing rounds, bullets every time, mortar rounds are landing and all kind of things are happening, and they don't even have sufficient food or correct food to eat? Because I can tell you here, while I was in the front, anytime it's food time, for example, dinner, they will delay it in such a way that when I call to say, what is happening to the men's dinner, they'll say, well, the headquarters say no vehicle movement after 6 p.m. So there is no food. I had to get gari and sardine. We use dry gari and put sardine on top of it, just the oil of the sardine, and eat.
The second contingency also came back, and they also demonstrated. This time around, they went up to Denton Bridge. All right? They were stopped by Colonel Sar, Samsidin Sar, then, who was then an attaché to the Defense Ministry. He was able to convince them, because he can talk. He was able to convince them. They brought them back to the camp, and then they were also later arrested, taken to Mile 2.
We were able to contain them briefly at the bridge, and then later they were allowed to assemble at the then Makati Square, where the commander of the GNA, Den Daunjai, eventually joined them with Pasala Jain, and then went to the presidency. And then after some discussion, they came and then were able to convince them to calm down and then to return to the barracks.
Do you recall the date this event occurred?
Certainly not, but I think it was within the general time. But the exact date I cannot recall. It must be in the historical records. I'm sure you can dig it out.
1990, would it be at around that time?
1990, 91. I'm not very sure, but I think it was a very significant happening, so we can locate the dates very well.
How many soldiers participated in this mutiny?
I think, if I can recall, between 60 to 80, if I can remember.
Were any officers involved?
No officer was visible, no officer was mentioned. I think it was led by the non-commissioned officers. The one I can remember then was one Sergeant Drame, and then there was also another Lance Corporal Bojang from Birkama.
Were any disciplinary measures taken against any of these soldiers?
Yes, I think when they eventually were persuaded to come back to their senses, they were brought to Yundum, and then we gathered them around the training pitch, and then after addressing them, we detained some of them and took them to Mile 2.
You talked about the presence of the Nigerian officers in the army. You said you went for training, and when you returned, you found the Nigerians in charge. Do you recall that?
Yes, I found the Nigerians on the ground. The commander was Dada. He brought a team of trainers, so-called. So that's why it's called Nigerian Army Training Team in the first place. So he was commander of the army. In the first place, we thought that it is unconstitutional for a foreigner to command a sovereign army if it is not a war situation. We went through this before in the gendarmerie. Perhaps I won't say much about that. I know very little about gendarmerie. But in the army, it's not supposed to be that way. A foreigner shouldn't command. How does it feel when a foreigner becomes president of the Gambia, or becomes a minister or a cabinet minister? So we felt that something was wrong here. We couldn't have the Nigerians come command our army. As a training team, they could come up with a small team of trainers, establish the offices, and technically advise us on the way forward. But they came here and took over our army, and so that was not right.
The position of the commander, Gambia National Army, was a Nigerian. There was also two full-bird colonels, Colonel Awo Nibi and Colonel Akoji, who were appointed as, one was Colonel G1 and the other was G2. One was responsible for training and operations, the other was responsible for admin and logistics. And then below them, we had the battalion commanders. There were also 2 Nigerian lieutenant colonels. One was appointed commander of the 1 infantry battalion in Yundum. The other was the Colonel Salik I earlier mentioned, was appointed the commander of the then 2 infantry battalion in Farafenye. And below them, we had various staff officers, and some of them were lawyers, some of them were doctors, there were other officers who were appointed in the training roles, etc., etc.
The presence of the Nigerians has brought some resentment within the Gambian army, because the Nigerian team was not a training team; it was a command team.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? That it was a command team and not a training team?
Yes. What I meant by that is all the strategic commands were positions were headed by Nigerians, and what we may call the crop of the Gambian then senior officers were just dumped at the army headquarters.
Did they have any command responsibilities?
No.
It was when the Nigerians came that we started the idea of having a 2nd battalion at Farafenye. Within the battalion setup, you have the commanding officer, and then in a battalion you have, in some structures, you have 3 companies, each company with a company commander, and 3 platoons, each headed by platoon commanders. So this is the hierarchy. And within this, you have at the top, at the battalion HQ, where you have the company commander, the adjutant as the admin officer, and then you have the deputy commanding officer within that structure, and then below, that's where you now have all the companies headed by company commanders and platoon commanders, and then you have the men and their sections.
I believe the Nigerians were much more provided for. They had many allowances, housing, even though they were a technical team. They had all the facilities. We saw them in the Nigerian army. A lieutenant salary in the Gambia army was equal to a lieutenant colonel salary in the Nigerian army. But when they came here, they received 2-3 times our salary. And they had comfortable housing, transportation, and so on. We had to share cars. The Nigerians, they were comfortable.
Did that disparity have any impact on the feelings of the junior officers, Gambian junior officers in the army?
To be precise, yes.
How did you, the junior officers at the time, feel about the situation?
Well, we felt we were being toyed around and we were being humiliated and insulted. And the Nigerians knew that we were not happy. I think at some point they realized that we were not happy. So they came up with what was called the terms and conditions of service, recommendations for the government, so they could also try to upgrade our conditions, see how best we could get more transport allowances and housing as officers and men. So I was part of the commission that set up the terms and conditions of service at the army
ñun ñi xool leeraayu lii riir ngir liberté